Halloween costume
Are you still going with what you told me about last time?
yet. It's so ridiculously been difficult to make.
I'm
So-
sure what you told me about it, I was like, that's gonna be an endeavor.
Well, I mean, it's more like I just can't find like a good enough
Template.
design that I could, template.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't know. I haven't picked anything out for myself, but
Yeah.
I hope that you follow through on that because it would be cool. But yeah, I did get a chance to. I got back just about an hour ago. I got down to check out Zoe Kravitz's new movie, Blink Twice, and it blew me away. It was so much fun. Like it's
Oh, really?
Evil Channing Tatum is everything I need out of a movie. Yeah, that movie rocked, and I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Great editing style. It was great. But yeah,
Yes.
we are joined this week by a very special guest, a gentleman who I've been in touch with for about I'd say a decade now. It's about a little over, somewhere in there.
Feels that way.
Yeah, it's been a minute, and you've spawned quite the career since then. I've been watching you kind of grow and take on some additional work here, and I actually watched you build your own studio. You've since you left Toronto. You were there when I think you and I had initially gotten in touch.
Yeah, no, I was in Toronto at that time. Yeah, so that would have been about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I was working at a trailer house at the time.
Yeah.
I would have been pretty early on in my career at that time. I was just a trailer guy at that time. I was doing a bunch of little trailers. I don't know what you call it, getting my chops, like
yeah, for sure.
working on trailers and conforming trailers and doing the online edits. I was getting opportunities to adjust the color and sometimes grade some of them. But yeah, I mean, that was definitely a great early sort of experience.
Yeah, for sure. It has to be nuts.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of go the overview of my path, I guess. So I grew up in San Diego, actually, and I was like working on skate videos and stuff down there, nothing crazy. But then I ended up kind of joining like the high school film program and kind of working on the broadcast channel there.
Yeah.
And that sort of thought, like, that turned into, I went to Cal Arts. I was a big like Tim Burton fan at the time, and that's where he went, and that's like where a lot of Pixar people have gone.
Yeah.
It's a big animation program, but that didn't interest me as much as like the film program. So I went there, and I ended up we had a 16 millimeter film production class, and I didn't even know what color grading was. We were told to shoot these 5-minute films on 16.
Yeah.
And so we shot this whatever video, I can't remember what it was, and we took it to, I think it was like a studio called Magic Film and Video in Burbank.
Okay.
And it was like we were just there to do like a transfer. This was like 2007, and I was like, oh, we're going to transfer this to video so that we can kind of work on it, And I didn't realize what color grading really was. So we went into the telecine session, and I was like, oh, this guy's like, he's changing the shirt color and like the whole mood of the thing, and it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, oh, this feels like what I want to do, So it's like, I don't know, I just kind of fell in love with it from then on.
Yeah, and I think you and I have very much had that in common, because I kind of came into cinematography from an editing side, so like that was kind of like my transition pivot point was color grading,
right?
And like once I realized like, oh, this is like the digital equivalent of like chemically processing film. I was like, this is as close as you can get to kind of digging in with your hands and like getting all messy with some chemicals. So I was like, okay, I kind of understand this now, and it was like the marriage of like two worlds in terms of like post-production and like actually being on set with a camera. So like it was very appealing from that arena. So like, and once you like start digging in and playing around with it and starting understanding it, and then it's something that like it's a skill set that like is not super common amongst a lot of people. The people are becoming more and more aware that it is a superpower, because it's like it is that marriage of camera work and post-production. So it's like you kind of got to be in that fulcrum a little bit to like really wrap your head around it. And there was something unique about that drew me to it. I think it's cool. And
definitely.
Obviously you do too, for sure.
Yeah, it's like I was getting into the film industry like as like mini DV was kind of, I don't know if you remember that period where there was like the elitist adapters and like
oh yes,
there was all those like spinning glass and stuff like that, and like
all
these
the
weird
stuff.
contraptions to try and like mimic film, and so we were like shooting on those, and then we were also like shooting on film cameras, and we were trying to like always kind of strive to get like a filmic image, and I was kind of like, I kind of threw telecine, like it wasn't even in my head as like something that was useful anymore. It was like, this is an archaic skill set, that like I'm going to have no use for because it's related to film, which is going away. And I think I sort of realized like, well, it ties into right when the red was coming out as well.
Yeah.
And so then we had this digital camera that was like no longer using all these like crazy contraptions, and it was really like a good looking image. And, it was like right around the time I had seen what you could do in a telecine room with a Da Vinci. And the two kind of like, it was like an inflection point where it was like, oh, okay, I can see where this is going to be really valuable, as like a artistic touch to the digital image, like, so I just kind of opened my mind up to what I could do as a colorist, and, how that would fit into like what I wanted to do as for a career. And yeah, so I just kind of went like, I dove in head first from that moment. It's like, it just kind of became my full focus.
Yeah, and the tech is constantly evolving with filmmaking. It's just this ever-changing landscape that's impossible to stay fully on top of. And I remember that like transition into like digital color grading, because weirdly enough, like that was like right around when I started into things, was when color grading was like just starting out to becoming a thing. And it was kind of nuts to like actually dive into that end of the pool, because it was like nobody. I felt like I was starting out in an arena that nobody else really was playing in yet, at least not on the tier that I was. So it was like I felt like I had a bit of a superpower, kind of cheating the game a little bit.
Oh, like doing color at that time?
Yeah, like because like so many projects I remember, like at least back in the days of like trumpeting around in school and stuff, and just like school-based projects, like nobody was like really like at least doing heavy processing on stuff, or at least not like second and third passes on things, and going through and like really like grilling down footage. And like people, like you could make Canon DSLRs at the time, which were fresh and brand new, you could make them look just as sharp as some of like the top end cameras at the time if you really like rolled up your sleeves and like were willing to cook up some footage. So yeah, it did feel like a bit of a superpower at the time, and still today.
Yeah, I mean, it was especially unique then because like this was even before Da Vinci came out. Like, because I started coloring pretty much the end of 2007.
Yeah,
like right around I was at CalArts, and so I was just like learning Apple Color because that was the only tool available. Da Vinci was still like $1 million.
Yeah,
it was some absurd number.
Like the gap between like the prosumer and like the high end stuff was like a militant distance. It was like not attainable.
It was there was basically micro suites in a kid's dorm room, or there was like the giant facilities.
Yeah,
and there was no in between. But it was like there was like this gap that needed to be filled because the red had just come out, and everyone was like, how do we process this stuff? Like, how do we color it, and how do we work with this footage? And it's hard to work with, and the files are big, and they're not playing back right, and it's like, but we're still like micro productions. There was still a lot of like grassroots indie stuff happening that couldn't use big facilities.
Yeah.
So I just sort of found myself like, okay, well, I can kind of fill this gap. This is a good place for me to be, and like I can like work on all these projects that have nowhere to go, basically.
Yeah, and it's something that a lot of people don't even think about before they're getting into it, and then they have all this footage that they realize that they're not cut out to process and handle, and I need to bring in another party who knows how to do this, so that puts you in a prime position for that.
Yeah, especially then, it was just so new. And it was like a lot of people I was working with were DPs that have been shooting film for years, and they're like, I don't know what to do with this stuff. I had to shoot with a red camera, and it's like, well, this is pretty much like right. I dove head first into it. I became like a knowledgeable person about it.
Yeah, through necessity, because like
I just found myself on like a ton of indie features and basically anything digitally shot, which was a lot of stuff, and it sort of gave me a good like building block to cut my teeth on and learn. And I definitely got in over my head, early on, but it was like it's just kind of where I found myself,
Yeah, that's the best place to be. I'm very much an advocate of getting in over your head.
Yeah,
ask Han, he can tell you.
Yeah, I'm not real though. I'm an AI voice on the other end.
You're an AI voice. Okay.
Well, speaking of which, Han and I were talking about this last week or last episode about like the rise of AI and like the implications that it has on the industry. It's like there's like an ever changing landscape of tools and things that are pushing people around, and constant chaos, as you know better than anybody. But I did kind of want to get your take. Like, what do you think about AI and how it may even impact color grading, even though it may be further down the pipeline of other things that may get affected first?
It's funny. I listened to that episode that you guys did about AI. It was great.
Oh, wow.
I got almost the way through it, and then I had to go have dinner.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think what I'm finding with it is because I played a little bit with it in color. I mean, definitely at some point it's going to get good enough. I'm kind of prepared for that.
Yeah.
And I think it's just I think the end result will be cutting the amount of hours needed for certain things.
Yeah.
It's just going to streamline things more.
I'm very much in for the
yeah.
like philosophy that DaVinci has with it, and like they're at least at this point they've been focused on things like tracking and text placement, things like that, and like just cutting down like tedious tasks. And I am very much in for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean that's even on the editing side of DaVinci, which I don't even look at. It's like for me the color page is everything. Like they've added all this stuff, which is great, but I'm always like, yeah, it's funny. I haven't delved into much of it, but there's been some cool stuff like closed captioning and stuff that they've done, and yeah, I mean it's such a useful tool.
Oh, absolutely. They're definitely kind of clawing their way towards being like an industry standard all-purpose editor, and obviously their color tools that are built into the software are a huge advantage towards that end.
Is DaVinci the standard right now or no?
Not currently, but there's definitely like a flux state. I know a lot of people are tossing out Adobe in favor of DaVinci. So it's definitely I'm watching that transition.
For color, it is. I would say there's in terms of like the amount of color, giant movies that are graded on it. It's pretty much between DaVinci and Baselight, but there's probably a tenth the amount of Baselights if that.
I think it's just the open accessibility with DaVinci. Like it's just so easy to get access to it.
Yeah,
it's hard to beat that.
Exactly. You can have assist stations all over the place, and you can have home suites. Your colorist can have suites at home and on their laptop and on their iPad and at their office, and it's hard to beat with that kind of access.
It's a smart philosophy for them to have too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, now that we've kind of covered some of the history going forward, it's like we talked a little bit about AI, but like watching DaVinci evolve over the last few years, especially because that's what I primarily utilize. I know that you primarily utilize it as well, and just the amount of tools that are available in what can be packed into a laptop that you can shove into a bag and basically have on you at all times is kind of insane to me. Like you can have all these power windows tracking all these different things, running a node-based structure of like how many different color grades. It's like, and all this can run on a processor that can basically fit in a small bag. Is just thinking back to like the evolution, like all the way we were talking about like coming up right when that was like becoming a thing. It's like how far it's come already is just insane.
It is insane. I still remember dial-up.
Yeah, honestly,
I do too. Yeah, I remember having to get off so my parents could make phone calls and stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean half the stuff we look at now, I'm just like, man, that seems like almost science fiction like years ago.
Yeah.
You would also mention too, like the red camera, like coming up. It's like what was also always fascinated me about color grading is you can kind of like in merging different camera style, like cameras together. Like you can match different camera. Like a lot of shoots hybridize and use multiple types of cameras, like say a Sony FX3, a Red, like all these different like inherently different styled cameras that don't naturally look like one another. You can kind of like meet them in the middle a little bit and make what shouldn't happen like these cameras look like one another. So I think it's bringing things to a very interesting place of like the versatility that it's offering to shoots to do weird things like that. And like obviously it's not ideal, but it's like you're dealing with a pool of filmmakers who have all different kinds of gear who can collaborate and do all these interesting things now.
Yeah, I mean, I see all kinds of different cameras used on stuff now. It's like, especially in like music videos, which I do a lot of. It's like VHS. They're like throwing everything in right now. That's kind of where the aesthetic's going. It's like you're mixing film with digital with like handycam stuff, but ultimately, the tools are there to get it all to match pretty well. So I mean, DaVinci's never been more powerful for color grading.
Yeah, and even on the remaster side too. Like I know DaVinci has and works directly with ARRI to have all different kinds of film scanning drawn directly in. So I know a lot of remasters go through what is typically like a post-production process for a lot of like currently running productions. But like now it's like the idea of the restoration coming back and like drawing in all these negatives and digitally, drawing them in on top of like all kinds of analog processes that are done with them. It's like there's so much different kinds of work that are coming to the forefront now. It's so cool to watch all this kind of stuff coming together. And like we had talked in the past about the Jaws remaster and Poltergeist now, which had gone through a very similar process through Amblin. There's all these kinds of cool things happening, and it's fun to watch like all these different processes evolve and take on new shapes, and like people try this crazy new cool thing, and then you see this absurdly clear image, like especially like for me personally watching both the Poltergeist and the Jaws remaster go through, like the clarity they were able to pull from both those just is mind-boggling.
Yeah, I mean, because now they're doing HDR masters of all these old films, which totally changes what anyone thought it could be, you know?
Yeah, it's like you feel like you're seeing it for the first time.
Yeah, HDR is adding a whole new level of what you can do in color. I mean, in terms of like the amount of depth you get in the shadows and on the highlights and dynamic range and the luminance and like the effect that could have on the audience, just having that much brightness on the screen, I think it like can emotionally affect you differently. Yeah, it's added a lot of new elements to color. Some people aren't crazy about it, you know. I know a lot of colorists, they still like to work in like a normal, you know, Rec 709 kind of color space or P3.
Yeah.
But which is to say like it doesn't have as much nits of brightness, but because it can feel a little bit oppressive sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, the like canvas is opened up basically. So
yeah, and like those types of processes can inform, you know, how you handle a new project or how like shot on any number of digital formats. It's like that there's a lot to be learned from all that. So it's kind of cool that they're literally like opening up the hood and like seeing how these things tick, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we're in for like a crazy new age of accessibility with film and especially color grading, and it's gonna be very interesting as things go forward with all these incredibly accessible cameras, and you know, obviously be like having at the tip of your fingertip the ability to process them on a laptop to like a theater quality presentation is just so cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it's going. I mean, it's hard to nail down. Because I'll get like commercial stuff and it, you know, shot on an iPhone.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, we want you to color this, and it's like, you sure? Like it's it feels like overkill, you know, to color this iPhone footage, but you know, it's like part of the arsenal now, you know. It's just there's tons of user generated content and stuff like that like it's just part of the pipeline now.
Yeah.
And also, you know, like now that the iPhones can shoot log and like Apple has their own Kodak and color space, you know, that's good, and I'm sure it's just going to get better.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, you just have to be. It's constantly changing. Like,
well, I do love, like, especially for Apple's like keynotes that they do, they always say shot on iPhone, but then like they show like you catch a glimpse of the rig behind, and it's got like a full cinema prime, like in this crazy weird rig, and I'm like, yeah, nobody's shooting an iPhone like that. Like,
yeah, exactly. They have all kinds of stuff going on there. Yeah, and I mean, also in the color grades on that stuff, you know, there's a lot of times like keys going on and sharpening faces a little bit more, and there's definitely a lot of help coming in, and maybe some sky replacements, you know, and stuff like that. But you know, those are, I don't know, just the secrets of
tricks. Of
the they've been doing that with the tricks of the trade. I mean, even in like the film presentations, they'd be like, you know, here's this new stock, or you know, here's our Kodak would do like a film presentation, but that had all been through color, and they adjusted skin tones and stuff like that. So it's always been kind of part of the trick of the trade, I guess.
Especially with how long they've been doing it, they've like, I'm sure they've got it fine tuned to a like repeatable science.
Yeah, exactly. It all goes through a final color grade either way.
Yeah, very very cool stuff though. Like I do watch. To my shame, I watch those keynotes. So like
me too.
Every year. I gotta stay on top of what's coming. So
yeah.
I
iPhone
think
16, right?
iPhone 16. Rumor has it shutter button. We'll see. I think that could be cool. But
what is it gonna have?
Apparently, they're putting in a physical button for the camera. That's like a digital slide. I don't like. I may eat my words in like something like 10 days, but
okay. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, apparently, like they're gonna have a physical shutter button for the camera.
iPhone is?
Oh,
are we talking about iPhone still?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's gonna have some kind of like slide touch functionality for like zooming in and out, and like it's gonna have a 1-2 press like an SLR.
Oh, cool.
So we'll see. I don't know.
Nice.
I could be eating my words on that. That's the rumor mill. I don't know. But
Yeah, we'll see.
yeah, I think it's interesting times. Like we're like things that are new are kind of taking a page from what was. So it's like it's interesting.
Yeah.
As much as things move forward, they also kind of move back.
There's totally that trend of like people are getting the old point and shoots and stuff from like 2004. Like old Epson. I don't know what you even call those cameras, point and shoots, I guess.
Yeah.
Like low megapixels, like that aesthetic is all coming back. And I think like people just want to have that tactile kind of thing again. So it makes sense that Apple would want to do something like that.
Yeah. And it seems that like their camera is generally the focus of their push outs every year. So yeah, it's interesting. Looking at the crazy library of movies from this past year, it's like I've seen like so many movies have such finely tuned looks, and I find it interesting that the film look, as it's often referred to, like going through and like pulling out like those old film stocks like Kodak and all these different film emulators, as it's often referred to, is interesting, because it's like we were saying, like things that are moving forward are also kind of taking a page out of what was and looking back a little bit. And it was interesting because Blink Twice kind of had a bit of that in its grade going on, which is kind of like what spurred a lot of thought processes for me tonight. And I just think it's interesting how we're kind of looking back on all that stuff. And there's all kinds of new platforms coming out. Like I feel like every day I'm not all the way on top of it because I hear something new. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, film emulation is like, I feel like that's all I've heard in the color world for the last 5 years. But just, that aesthetic is just really in right now. But I guess we're harkening back to those days, though. I mean, basically all of film history. But I feel like we kind of drifted away from it for a while. We had like, I don't know,
the clean look was very in.
Yeah, exactly, the clean look. Thinking like Transformers, the teal and orange, but it like wasn't necessarily filmy, stuff like that. It's funny, like when you look at the era of kind of the last 20 years of color grading or like looks, aesthetics in film. Like I always see like 2000 or like maybe 1996 to like 2008. It was like there was a lot of like high contrast, low saturation, kind of bleach bypass.
Yeah, especially stuff like Minority Report and a lot of the like Spielberg and Janusz collaborations. Like they really like that process there for a minute.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of those like really heavy looks. And then when the Red came out and the Alexa, all of a sudden things got really flat. Like 2010 to like 2014, like a lot of the films, I'm trying to think of something in particular, but I think people just fell in love with the log kind of feel.
Yeah.
That loggy kind of looks. I remember like during that time, I was relatively new to color at that time. Like I was in for a few years, and people would just be like, just a little bit of contrast, It was like, I always felt like I wasn't doing enough. I was like, oh, this is it? We just want to add this little bit of contrast? And like I wanted to like play with, move the knobs around more and like push the contrast, push the saturation and color separation.
Push those knobs, twist those levers.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to go nuts, but there was like this real, people were just, I think it was so new just to have like that flat log image, it just, people weren't used to seeing it, and it was interesting.
I remember even Marvel kind of had that look a little bit for a good stint.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some films that like really use that look. I'm just blanking out. Normally I remember these things. It's been a while since I've looked back at this. Oh shoot. Regardless, there was a period of like really flat, like log looking films, and then I think in the like last 5 years or so, contrast has sort of started to make a comeback, like deep, dense, colorful images.
I would agree with that.
Like, people they want to see halation and like grain and like all kinds of texture. And
well, I think it's interesting too, because like a lot of that stuff is coming in as like assets now. People will like shoot for a hyper clean image, but then they'll like add those things in post, which I find super interesting that we're now getting to that level of control.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, what influences those changes, like in the color grade, like to go from not having the high contrast? Is it just kind of like someone just decides to do it and like it gets received well, and then other people start to follow along and imitate it and say, oh, we got to do that too?
think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because right around that time, like Drive came out, which was created by Tom Poole, and Drive had I would say, a fairly flattish look to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like the Alexa had come out around that time. I think there was just
I remember that was one of the big champions for the Alexa. I remember everyone was going nuts for it.
Yeah, they love the Alexa log, like, and I think people just didn't want to veer away from it too much. And, like the dailies workflow wasn't worked out quite at that time, and people weren't really like dealing with LUTs and stuff. And so the production was seeing it in log, and people just kind of got temp love to it. And that's what we would call it, like tempitis or temp love, because sometimes the DP or the director or whoever would be like, I don't know, I really like the flat look, we're pushing the contrast too much. But, you look at the scopes, and we really weren't doing that much with the contrast. It just wasn't like super flat. So they just got really used to it. So I think like for a while there, people were just kind of gravitating towards that flatter look. And then, so one film like Drive does really well, and people love the look of that film. It was also just like a good movie. And I think like that sort of reinforced that, and then it became like a reference for other films, and it kind of like the cycle goes on until the next hit comes and like sort of influences the next generation of aesthetics. I think that's kind of what was going on there.
I think every so often, like the industry kind of gets like back on its heels and like waits for a game changer like that, and then there's like this big explosive moment after like a bit of a pause.
Yeah,
like
Drive was definitely one that I heard a ton when that came out. Like that was like a reference I would always hear.
Yeah,
I mean, like I'm trying to think, 300 was one that I heard a lot. Like, and that was just when I was getting started.
That was one that was like that drove a force for VFX hardcore.
Yeah, exactly. Reference for VFX, reference for all kinds of stuff. And then Transformers, with the teal and orange, that was a big push for a while there.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes these films come around and they make an impact, and then they become like a key reference, I feel like, for a while.
Yeah.
Like the
Ebbs
mullet
and flows.
Anyone see the mullet coming back a little bit now? I don't know. I've seen
the mullet.
I'm like,
the old Kenny Powers, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, when did this happen? And why did I not get the memo?
Right. The memo had.
It's going to take me at least
a moment like the early aughts, I feel, with hipsters and stuff. But
yeah,
maybe it went away. Maybe it's coming back around again. I haven't seen it too much.
Maybe it's just my region here. I've just seen a couple mullets recently, and I'm like, when did this happen?
Eastbound and Down's gaining popularity, man.
Yep.
It's going to make a comeback.
It's in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, don't ask me why. But
I know.
I don't have a good answer for that. It's a little shameful for the region, but
yeah.
So I was just curious, like when you're given like a project, can you talk a little bit about it, maybe in a condensed form? I'm sure there's like a ton of work that goes into it, but like where do you start when you're doing like the color grading? Is it more just you just kind of go with whatever anyone says they want it to look like, or do you get to have some creative freedom, or does it depend on the project?
Yeah, it totally depends. A lot of times I'll just kind of look at the footage and I'll know right away where it's kind of sitting or where I see it going.
Mm-hmm.
Besides that, I'll always ask for references. What were you guys inspired by for this? Do you have any references? And right away that'll narrow it down quite a bit. So usually when I'm given a project, I'll do a look that's kind of just strikes me for the project that makes sense in my head. And then aside from that, I'll try and match a reference, maybe another look, and then I'll do sort of an alt look that's in between the two of them. I guess I'm talking mostly about commercials with this because it's like a easier kind of project to do this kind of quick look development on. Yeah, and so from there, I'll just sort of sit with the agency and we'll dial it in where we want it to be.
And I'm sure it tends to be very collaborative in like that large of a setting. You're dealing with a lot of different entities and a lot of different opinions.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the challenges of being a colorist is like we're the last person to touch the project, and often I'm sitting with like a DP or the director and the agency and the creative director, and it's producers throwing in some insight or their thoughts, and I'm kind of like it's a little bit political. It's like, well, whose like voice should I listen to the most here? And
I'm sure that gets very hairy and complicated.
But oftentimes I'll have in a commercial. It usually it comes down to the agency creative director that kind of has the final say most of the time. Oftentimes the DP or director will kind of hit me on the side and say, hey, can we do a director's cut with that other look, something like that, which is no problem. Because I think, with the agency in a commercial, their primary goal is like making the product look the best it can and getting that to pop out the most, which usually means brighter, a little bit more colorful on the product, a little bit, it's just sort of product centric typically. Whereas, the filmmakers, the director and the DP are kind of thinking more about like the narrative and the story and like just sort of the overall pleasingness of the images. You know what I mean? Where the product is totally secondary. So yeah, that's sort of like the two different worlds that you're battling. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just like you said, the political side of things just adds a whole other element onto an already complex process.
Yeah. Luckily, I mean, everyone usually gets it. Everyone's kind of like, okay, I understand. We got to like prioritize this, but can we also do a director's cut with a different look?
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of like multiple passes as a result of that.
Yeah, exactly. I do 2 passes typically, like director's cut and then like the agency's version.
So I gotta ask though, like on some of your more complex projects, like how many like tracked power windows have you seen? Like on the most, I guess on the most craziest version of a pass that you've seen.
Oh, geez. I mean,
like processor breaking level tracking.
Yeah, I did this, it was like a Harry Potter toy commercial, and we basically ended up rotoing every toy.
Oh my.
And so I think there was like 30 action figures in the shot. So yeah, we were like bringing up each character, and then inside of each of those windows, it was like adjusting the hair color and the beard color and the eyes and the brightness of the pants. And it can get pretty crazy.
At the sound of that, I can hear the sound of my computer just sweating at the possibility of that.
Yeah, it can get pretty heavy duty. But yeah, it's because sometimes as a colorist you end up in those sessions where it's like, let's put a window here and a window there and a window there. It's like you're more like being the driver versus the creative, I guess. So I think that's the trick, is you have to be pretty flexible as a colorist, and have to have the ability to kind of know where your clients kind of want you to fit into this piece, whether, because sometimes they come in and they're like, just do your thing, and I'll get that often with clients that I've worked with for a long time. They won't even come in. They're just like, hey, we have this commercial. Here it is. Here are the files. I'm going on set. Just do what you do. You know what I like. I won't even talk to a client. I'll send the pass off, and then the client will sign off. They'll sign off, and it'll all be done. There's those, and then there's the ones where it's like the clients come in, and it's like 1,000 windows and multiple passes, and it kind of, the feedback might linger on for days because the client from the agency has notes, and there's so many different ways it can go. Yeah, so you got to be very flexible and kind of prepared to feel out like what's this project going to look like, and kind of be able to roll with the punches.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to ask you, how often have you dealt with like gamma outputs like not being consistent with like what you viewed in the actual process of running the color pass?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant problem.
I think it's just like one of these things that just like will plague every filmmaker ever. It's like what you export is just not gonna look like what you did.
Yeah, it certainly was a bigger problem like 5 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
Where it was like so and so had like an IBM computer, and someone else was viewing on their MacBook, and somebody else was on their iPad, and their brightness was down and their brightness was up, and you know what I mean? Like at that point,
somebody was viewing on a non-color safe monitor.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody's on a who knows what. They're viewing on their parents' LCD that's on vivid mode, and
oh, gosh.
So it's there. There was a ton more of that years ago, but it's gotten so much better now, because you can kind of say, do you have an iPad or an iPhone? Because just judge off of that.
That's what I always do too.
Yeah, because it's like everyone has one now. It's in this industry, and they're great displays right out of the box.
Yeah.
Just turn off True Tone, and everyone kind of has the same monitor, so we're all looking at the same thing, so it makes it way easier for us to communicate about what we're seeing.
Yeah.
So that's actually made a lot easier, and it's definitely like a less of an issue these days.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said about iPads and iPhones, it's like it is one of the more common types of devices out there, so you can rely on that. If it looks like it on here, it's like I can bet that as long as the output the export cooperates, this is what the consumer will be seeing. So
yeah, exactly.
There's a sense of like peace and calm about that.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally you'll have like an editor that has the gamma set wrong when they do the final exports or that kind of thing, but it's relatively easy to resolve.
Well, that's the other thing too, is like, when you're working in a full setup like you are, I mean, you have so many more moving parts. Like I, as just a single user, it's like I know what I have to do, but like down a pipeline and having to communicate it across a full team of people, that's like a whole other thing.
Yeah, I mean, usually I'll get a chance to look at those exports from that go to the editor, whoever's doing finishing.
Yeah.
So I'll have a chance to kind of go like, oh yeah, this looks right. But usually somebody else will catch it because, like I said, everyone has like an iPhone or, good enough screen now to judge. So they'll know if something feels off from what they've been judging.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's strange how far it's come though. Like just the technology and the ability to use color in, be it a commercial or more like a narrative driven piece.
Absolutely.
Where
yeah.
it was before it was like you could only do it with photochemical processing. It's like now there's like I feel like it has opened up an even a much wider world of what's possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny, the tools haven't changed all that much in the past 10 years. I mean, in terms of like the color tools that are in DaVinci, like they've kind of had the same like primary lift, gamma, gain. You got some keys, you got some curves. That's all kind of been there for years now. I don't know, 15 years. It's been kind of the same.
Yeah.
But I think people have just dialed in like the workflows a lot better, and then like the color science from Ari and red color science has gotten better. So it's just people are better at shooting on these formats now. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of kind of the whole industry has gotten better at dealing with it and creating better images. Like with DaVinci being more accessible to everyone, like we're seeing like reality shows that normally wouldn't get like a good color pass. They're getting like a pretty good color pass now. I mean, like basically everything now goes through a colorist, or somebody who knows those tools to some degree. So it's, we have a lot of good images out there.
Yeah, it's the sheer amount of content. I think like the bulk of it is actually getting a solid color pass is wild.
Yeah, well, exactly. There was a period there where it was like only features and big TV shows and commercials. Like all that other content was kind of thrown to the wayside.
Yeah, and they had to either had to bake a certain look in camera, or it's like your footage would come back however it would come back.
Right. Or they're using some kind of, filter working in Final Cut or something, like some quick process to get through.
Well, I feel like especially like around the mid 2000s, like optical filtering was like huge compared to what it is now. Like it is nowhere near as like substantial for the sake of like color changes. Like especially shows like NCIS Miami, I always remember like they were just like blowing out the oranges like crazy, and it was like clear like they were using like gradient filters and stuff. And I was like, that looked kind of just like dissipated after like color, I guess like after post-production color came around.
Yeah, I mean there was a time there when color was really being pushed super heavy. That's kind of what I was saying, is that period right before everything got flat, it was like everything was super pushed, like heavy vignettes on stuff, and
like all baked in, so it's like there's no changing it once it's there.
Yeah. Oh, you mean they're shooting with like filters and stuff on set?
Yeah, actually matte box filters and like just gradients, and just like it's how the footage is. It's how we shot it. Like it's there forever.
Yeah.
And that is just not the philosophy of today at all.
No. That's very true.
Hanav, I mentioned in previous episodes too, we were talking about like the current state of like digital everything is like a crisis of options. It's like there's a certain interesting thing about the nostalgia of like analog, I want to say filmmaking, but analog, any kind of content creation, in which like there's something about baking it in and just knowing how it was going to be, versus nowadays where it's like your brain just like sets on fire when you think about all the possibilities for where things can go. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a huge benefit to shooting with intention,
yeah.
Oh yes, yeah,
and that helps a lot when I work on a project and it's like we shot on film and we shot 2 stops under, or whatever. There's like some commitment being made early on. I think that often helps these days kind of narrow down and hyper focus on what you're trying to achieve with the aesthetic or the look of the film.
I think it can be helpful to kind of like front load the ideas a little bit. Maybe not all of them, but I think it can set things on a certain path, and there's something to committing to that path, for good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, I always appreciate it when somebody has like a project and like, this is what we're trying to do. Here's the look. This is what I shot it for. Here's the LUT I used, on set. Like, hone this in as much as you can. And that's always kind of it's a lot easier to work that way. It kind of just aligns everyone's goals.
Yeah.
Because, it's true. I mean, with all the latitude there is in images now, and just how many directions you can take it, it can be a rabbit hole.
For sure.
Yeah. And it's more common now for colorists to work in pre-production, kind of be involved in that early on, and kind of so that everyone's more aligned later on in the process. It's harder to do in commercials and stuff. in music
Faster
videos
paced.
because everything's just quicker turnaround. Didn't have time. But in TV and film, I'd say it's becoming much more common to like get involved early, and everyone's more aligned at the end because there was a big chunk of time there where color was sort of like an afterthought.
Yeah.
Not to say that good work wasn't being done, but it just like wasn't as dialed, I guess.
I was just going to ask if that was becoming more integral to like the shooting.
Now
like,
they'll
having a colorist on the set to be like, well, if you set the camera this way, or if you go for this shot, it'll help later on when we go to color it in the way you want, etc.
Yeah, I mean, now you'll have a show LUT, and so usually the director, DP, colorist, they'll work together to create a show LUT, and then they'll use that to kind of shoot with and monitor and everything, or to monitor, not to shoot with.
But it's at least get you in the baseline of things.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, and that's also what kind of the showrunners will see. Everyone's kind of getting used to the idea of this being kind of the look versus before when you would see all that log footage and everyone's like, well, I kind of like this, So yeah, now it's helpful, kind of like gets everyone prepared for the direction of the way it's going to look, kind of like how it was in the olden days with film. You would go and get your rushes done in your dailies, and then those had kind of the look on them at that point. So it's kind of like we're going back in time a little bit, but the old workflows. But yeah,
I'm all for going back in time a little bit in all senses of the word.
Yeah, taking pieces from the way things used to be done and combining it with what's possible today.
Yeah,
and I like that too. It's like
old,
rediscovering some of the techniques of the past and being like, okay,
Yeah.
how do we apply them to today and learn from them and like try and create something new out of it.
Right. No, absolutely.
And not to glamorize and always say that everything that was done a certain way in the past is the sake, but occasionally things do get lost in the shuffle for the onrush of time.
100%.
Another thing I wanted to discuss with you real quick, it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and it's the nostalgia of film and how like it compares to digital, and just the nature of what you're shooting on not necessarily being quite as important as how you process it. And that's been one of my personal driving forces behind my creativity and things that I've done. But I think like I've seen film look like digital, I've seen digital look like film, and I think that's not to say that those things aren't important, but I think what is vastly more important is what you do with that information when you have it, which is exactly where color comes into the process. What format you shoot on, be it analog, digital, whatever, is nowhere near as important as how you process that footage once you have it.
Yes. Long story short, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of arguments sort of both ways.
And all valid.
Yeah, all valid. But yeah, I mean, like Steve Yedlin, who's a amazing DP, he's a big believer in digital, and like he's created a whole workflow and pipeline for shooting digital in a way that feels like film.
Yeah.
And it's more about like kind of the workflow he's created around it, or the image pipeline. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, a lot of people would say it's unnecessary to shoot film, because of what you can do in post now. You can't tell the difference. It's like a marginal benefit, if any, and if anything, like, yeah, I don't know, the benefit of shooting film is just because you're kind of locked in a little bit more to a look, although there's plenty of latitude in film too, so that's not even necessarily true, but it's
my personal take on it is that if you're going to shoot on film, you have to have a damn good reason for the cost value invested. Like, you have to have a very specific technical or visual reason to engage in that very intensive process. Like all the way down the camera pipeline, post-production pipeline. There's a lot that goes into that, and I'm not saying like it's a dead art form or anything for sure, but like it's like you have to, in this day and age, you have to have a good reason for doing it, and it can't just be flippant.
Totally. People just really love that aesthetic, especially in music videos. So they just want to, I hear it all the time, like want to look film emulation, and that's kind of like the end goal is to just make it feel as much like film as possible. And so if you want to be sure that you're going to get that, you can shoot on film.
Yeah.
But, also a good colorist can make it feel an awful lot like film, sometimes you can't tell. So I would say 99% of the people wouldn't be able to tell, except for like, people who are like other colorists or DPs that kind of, are looking at it really closely.
I sense a game show here. Film or fake.
Film or fake. I like it.
Actually, that's a great idea.
I do love. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I could see people being into that.
I just want to say I appreciate the hell out of you coming on, man, taking the time. This has been fun,
thank you.
honestly.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, maybe we'll get an opportunity to do another one someday, because this was a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. Just let me know.
Cool,
know where to find me. All right.
Yeah. Alrighty.